Hi, this is David Wyden, founder of SenteGuard, a company whose mission is to protect secrets in the LLM era. And this is a walkthrough of my recent article, Big Frontier, China, and Regulatory Capture. In the last year, a particular narrative has become more common in the AI policy world. The open source versus closed source AI debate is no longer being presented as a debate about architecture, competition, market structure, or technological resilience. Increasingly, big tech and its advocates have tried to recast it as a geopolitical loyalty test. China versus America. Who are you going to back? Instead of asking whether open models are better for innovation, security, diffusion, competition, or democratic control, the debate gets compressed into a simpler emotional frame. Closed frontier models are American, open models are dangerous, and anyone who questions the closed model strategy is somehow weakening the United States. I heard this move up close at the Harvard Kennedy School when Eric Schmidt came to speak. He warned that AI may soon cross into autonomous self-improvement. He argued that at some point, someone will need to raise their hand and impose limits. And then, almost naturally, the argument shifted towards geopolitics. America, China, competing trajectories. American values. The implicit message was clear. The responsible path is the American path, and the American path just so happens to run through a small number of closed frontier model companies, including his. Others have made versions of the same argument. Arun Chhabra, who leads national security policy at Anthropic, has argued for an American stack and framed model governance as part of the geopolitical contest. And look, there is something almost comical about hearing nationalist messaging from the Bay Area's longtime borderless global citizens, but the incentives are not hard to understand. Turning the open source versus closed source model debate into a national security referendum reframes restrictive rules and regulatory capture towards patriotism. That posture makes sense once you consider two facts. First, industries that live or die on regulatory rulemaking have to make their cases to the people holding the levers of power. In 2026 America, many of those people are professed patriotic Republicans, so the language of the pitch changes. Suddenly, the argument is not global governance, it is not cosmopolitan technocracy, it is America first, beating China, and it is protecting the free world. Second, Big Frontier LLM is no longer operating from a position of inevitable technical superiority. It is losing the easy assumption that America's lead is automatic, permanent, and unchallengeable. So the major closed model providers are on their back foot. And when you are on your back foot, it becomes necessary to frame the debate incorrectly. There is nothing inherently Chinese about open models, and there is nothing inherently American about closed models. If anything, the opposite is closer to true. Open models are decentralized, they are inspectable, they are forkable, they are difficult to monopolize, they align with an American instinct to diffuse power, prefer competition over permission, and distrust single points of control. Closed models concentrate capability behind a small number of gatekeepers. They are wrapped in secrecy, they are sustained by privileged access to regulators. That logic is much closer to centralized control than to open competition. So rather than framing the discussion as America versus China, we should instead consider democratic diffusion versus artificial scarcity, competition versus controlled dependency, and simply good tech versus bad tech. And this is where regulatory capture comes in. Safety arguments against open models can be sincere. They can also be institutionally self-serving. The political economy of strict open model controls is straightforward. Compliance is a fixed cost, and fixed costs are easier for giant incumbents to bear than for startups, researchers, independent developers, and smaller firms. That does not mean every safety proposal is capture. It does not mean everyone making safety arguments is cynical. But a legal regime designed around the idea that only a few trusted providers may exist is structurally aligned with incumbent interests. But I want to be fair. I would not pretend that the safety case is purely cynical. The useful analogy is virology. The life sciences have lived for decades with an uncomfortable fact. Biological knowledge is often dual use. The same methods that help us understand how pathogens spread, mutate, or evade immune response can also lower the barriers for malicious replication or reckless experimentation. In domains where the object of study is intrinsically hazardous, knowledge dispersion can be dangerous. So yes, there are real dual-use concerns, but we also have to be honest about where we are. Much of the dangerous knowledge is already public. Much of it has already been incorporated into existing models. Trying to retroactively censor the world is not a serious policy. The more practical approach is forward-looking. We should think about moving classification upstream. Certain classes of data may need to be treated as hazard enabling at scale, even if they have historically been considered public. Now, why do I say closed models are bad tech? The answer starts with distillation. Distillation is the mechanism by which closed models leak, or are copied, or are functionally stolen by competitors. A smaller student model is trained to imitate a larger teacher model by querying it at scale and learning from its outputs. In practice, once you ship a frontier model behind an API, you have created an attack surface. You have created a system that others can use, legally or illegally, to train imitators. So open models are already close behind the state of the art, and the gap is shrinking. If the frontier lead is only a few months, then what exactly is the public being asked to subsidize? Closed model maximalism asks the public to bankroll a capability edge that can often be copied down the stack. And distillation is basically a one-way process. Once model knowledge escapes into the world, it does not get put back into the box. Once weight exists in the wild, the knowledge they contain can spread. The result is that a great deal of public money invested in closed frontier systems may buy us, at best, half a generation of advantage before the advantage becomes baseline. Now, this kind of massive public investment can be justified if we are really in a race to a specific finish line. Maybe that finish line is AGI. Maybe the first firm to build it reaps infinite returns. Maybe the winner builds God GPT. Maybe the whole race ends at one decisive summit, and whoever gets there first controls the future. Dario Amodei and his peers would like you to believe something like this. They want us to believe there is a single peak, a single winner, and a civilizational imperative to fund the climb. I'm not going to make the full argument here against the possibility of God GPT, but I do think we should ask a simple question. If we cannot build it, what exactly has our public investment brought us? How much of our public architecture depends on God GPT being real and imminent? And do the frontier model builders have an interest in keeping us convinced that it is? Because if there is no singular AGI finish line, then the economics looks very different. Assume for a moment that we do not build God GPT. Where does the value from AI actually come from? I think it comes from two broad operational modes. First, LLMs will replace or enhance existing labor. Call them agents if you want. They will make workers more productive inside the task we already do. Second, frontier LLMs will help humans create new technology. They'll help us search through knowledge space, combine ideas, generate hypotheses, write code, test designs, and push outward from the current frontier. The open versus closed question looks different in each case. Start with labor enhancement. Here I struggle to see where a closed model creates durable value that an open model cannot. If the leading models are only a few months behind the best closed model, and if that gap keeps narrowing, then the closed model advantage in ordinary knowledge work looks thinner than advertised. More importantly, today's LLMs are already good enough to transform a huge amount of knowledge work once people learn how to use them effectively. They will never be less capable than they are today. The baseline has already moved. So beyond branding, default status, and the inertia of this is what everyone uses, it is hard to see how a short frontier lead translates into meaningful economy-wide productivity returns compared to open competitors. There's more reason to take frontier labs seriously when we talk about creating new technology. Even without accepting godlike AGI, we have already seen systems that appear to generate new knowledge, or at least synthesize huge amounts of dispersed knowledge in ways that humans cannot efficiently do on their own. The frontier labs may have a real advantage here because the marginal discovery can be expensive. Better resource models can search more of the space faster. But even here, the race metaphor is misleading. Knowledge is not a straight track with one finish line. It is more like a multi-dimensional blob. Human knowledge expands outward in many directions at once. Progress does not come from one AI outrunning every other AI toward a single endpoint. Progress comes from billions of humans and AI teams pushing outward in parallel. If a cheaper but slightly slower AI can be put in the hands of a billion knowledge seekers, it may create more new knowledge than a $200 a month model in the hands of 1 million people. If LLM capability has diminishing returns, then the frontier lead that depends on scale alone becomes harder and harder to defend over time. Then there's a profit model. Frontier firms have taken massive investment. Eventually, they need to turn a profit. They can do this through enterprise subscriptions, usage-based pricing, and business-facing products that make organizations more productive. Anthropic, for example, says this is their plan. And maybe that works. Maybe the delta between frontier closed models and open models remains significant enough that businesses will pay a premium for it. Maybe it does not. Maybe the delta shrinks. Maybe open models become good enough. Maybe closed models remain better, but not enough to justify the price, lock-in, and dependency. At minimum, the answer is uncertain. There's also another profit path: advertising. The largest pool of users is always the pool that does not want to pay very much. And once AI companies start moving towards ads, the whole story changes. Suddenly, they look less like civilization-defining infrastructure and more like the next version of every other tech platform. For the last couple of years, part of what people experienced as LLM superiority over traditional Google search may have been something simpler: the feeling of escaping advertisement-suffused search for the first time in decades. That feeling may not last. If the closed model future is subscription plus advertising plus lock-in, then what is the public really subsidizing? Maybe it's not GodGPT. Maybe it's not a permanent national advantage. Maybe it's a new and shitified ad service with a thinning claim to unique value in the form of a chatbot. If users can exit toward free or much cheaper open models once those models are good enough, then the closed model business becomes much less secure. This brings us to enforcement. The policy debate often assumes there is a stable choice between closed models under responsible control and open models in the wild. But in practice, a model can start closed, then leak, and then become open in effect. The Llama 1 leak is the obvious example. Meta did not initially release the model as a general public artifact. It was supposed to be a controlled research release. Then the weights leaked online within days and spread through channels like 4chan and through torrents. These models are large, but not large in the way policymakers sometimes imagine. The important intellectual property can be measured in hundreds of gigabytes. That is not nothing, but is also not a data center. It is small enough to copy, mirror, torrent, and pass around through ordinary internet infrastructure. Physically speaking, it can be carried in someone's pocket. So what would it actually take to enforce a serious open model moratorium? It would require inspectability of digital media. It would require serious limits on encryption. It would require unprecedented visibility into network traffic. It would require a level of surveillance that should make anyone uncomfortable. And the moratorium problem becomes even less credible once it depends on international cooperation. The Bletchley Declaration is a useful illustration. It recognized that many AI risks are international and calls for cooperation. But it is a political declaration, not an enforceable regime. And the kind of cooperation required for Bletchley is mild compared to what would be needed to enforce a global moratorium against what is, in practical terms, a relatively small amount of data and software. The likely outcome is not real control, but rather selective, incomplete restrictiveness. Some jurisdictions ban open releases. Others become havens. Diffusion continues anyways. So we should stop pretending that the open versus closed fight is America versus China. That framing is politically convenient precisely because it turns a complicated argument about market structure, democratic control, technological diffusion, and safety into a simple loyalty test. And American big frontier model companies have a vested interest in that loyalty test. Regulatory burden, rather than a superior product, becomes the moat. The danger is that we keep throwing good money after bad, paying again and again for a thin, temporary lead while the underlying capabilities diffuse anyways. Models do not unlearn. Capabilities spread. Open is not Chinese, closed is not American. Our primary concern should be what actually produces resilience, competition, and innovation. And if we care about those things, then we should lean into open models, open competition, and model-agnostic technology so we can build on top of them. This is a much better foundation than pretending that a handful of closed model incumbents are synonymous with America.